Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tanya Hill, your Director of Community Impact with First Baptist Church, North Indianapolis. This is a very special episode of Community Impact where we come together to shine light on individuals and organizations who are doing great things in our community. Today, this month, we recognize Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. And so we have a great guest today to help us increase awareness and educate us as a church community on what we could do to prevent domestic violence. So today we have Miss Danette Smith, and we are so very proud of her. She is part of the Indianapolis community. She is the founder of she is the founder of Silent No More and is currently the director of domestic violence prevention for the city of Indianapolis. So show her some love, send some good vibes. Welcome, lady. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I am awesome. I can't complain at all. Thank you so much. Hoping to
Good,
save you.
good deal. Is there anything you would like to add to your intro that our viewers should hear?
Nope, not at all. I'm a mother of two girls. They are about grown now, 16 and 20, as well as, of course, a leader, in my church as well. So making sure that I be in the stand front and in forward and those that I serve as well under, God's leadership.
All right, we thank you and we welcome you. So, could you give us, there's many definitions of domestic violence floating around. Some people believe it's only domestic violence if somebody like physically punches you in your face, or things of that nature, but we know that domestic violence is a little more inclusive of some other behaviors as well. In your words, from your perspective as a community leader and professional, could you share with us your definition of domestic violence?
Definitely. So domestic violence is all about power and control within a relationship, a family as well. And then in addition to any like caretaker, that can be from physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, that sexual abuse, financial abuse, stalking. And then we also like to add in there and not forget the spiritual or religion abuse as well.
All right, so that's pretty inclusive. About power and control. Wow, that covers a lot of territory. So we do know that you are a survivor, and we certainly applaud survivor-led outreach and work and ministry and all those sorts of things. But you came to found a very important pillar in our community that is Silent No More. Can you tell us, one, how you escape domestic violence yourself, and then we'll lead into a discussion about Silent No More and the services that it provides. So first, how did you escape domestic violence? We know that it could be a full weave and hard to escape.
Yes. So with my domestic violence, I went through it for 10 years. The first 2 years was a bliss. There was no violence. There wasn't anything. Once I became pregnant, and a couple months after I had my daughter is when the first physical abuse started with a blow to the eye. I currently have plates in my eye to hold my cornea. So you can kind of tell the difference in the eye, but you really can't tell the difference in the eye. And that physical abuse eventually led to the emotional abuse. The physical abuse led so much to where I started, sleeping with knives, putting knives in certain locations around the house, just that fear of him continuing to hit me. With the emotional abuse, it was a degrading, saying that, my family wouldn't care. My family doesn't love me. If they did, they would have been done, trying to help, all the things that can belittle someone and make me feel, horrible. I was feeling those things. It ultimately led to gun violence. Throughout those years of being in that abusive relationship, I left. I went to a friend's house. I left, moved out completely, put my things in storage, went to my mom's house. But each time I went back. And the difference with each time from the difference of the final time I went back was that each time I left, I didn't know how important the plan was when trying to flee domestic violence. I didn't
Let's
understand
back
that.
up a little bit. Um, I hear some things that are reminiscent to a grooming process of a predator, but you said there was a 2 year period when there was no violence. Take me back there. What was that like?
So the 2 year period when there was no violence, that's because, you know, that was that physical and emotional abuse. When we think about the violence, there was none of that. There was no red signs of the physical abuse. However, there were signs that I wouldn't have known were signs when I was in a relationship, such as like animal torture. And it isn't a torture of like, you know, set them on fire or anything, but just, you know, being able to catch an animal and kill an animal with a gun. You know, those are red flags in domestic violence. And then ultimately how you treat others. Those, there were some red flags in there that if I knew what I knew now, I would be able to spot it right away. But then I didn't know. So sometimes, you know,
Animal
relationship,
cruelty, like you said, catching animals and killing them, like what?
we're not necessarily catching them. So like if he catches a possum, like when he catches a possum, he's gonna shoot him with the 22. Like he literally isn't gonna, you know, take them down by Eagle Creek or anything like that and try to let them go or call the people who are supposed to come and get that possum. He literally would put it in the driveway and shoot it in the head with the 22 and kill it. So those things would be, you know, red flags. But to a person who doesn't know what you should do with animals, you know, you just don't, it's just not, are you just in a poverty stricken area where some things just aren't not normal. That was just something that, okay, you killed it, you got rid of the animal and move on with your life. It wasn't a threat of that gun being there. There was no threat of, oh, he's going to shoot me with that gun or anything like that. So that's how, you know, some of those red signs are red flags with domestic violence is torturing or even abuse of animals. Whether it's, you know, most people say animals and think a dog, a cat, because it's in the home, but that's any, you know, any animal that an individual can torture or kill is a red flag.
Okay. And so there, what other things that were going on in this 2 year period that may have been like a honeymoon period per se? What type of red flags occurred outside of animal cruelty that you just simply didn't identify as a red flag?
None.
None.
Everything else was a bliss. Everything else was great, only because at that point of time in my life, I had a hole, you know, within myself. And when I say that, there was a hole that wasn't filled, you know, from a father being there. There was a hole that was filled from struggling. And yes, food was on our table, but with my mother being a single parent, father living around the corner, but did absolutely nothing. Like those things psychologically can play with the little girl. And when some of those things that you didn't get from your daddy, whether that's dates going out, the finer things in life, the car, all the cars, all those things, you know, that void was being filled. So even though you know, those first 2 years was great. You know, once that abuse started, those things were no longer great. For the honeymoon stages, those things worked because he's able, in the honeymoon stage, the abuser is able to identify your needs. They know exactly what they were doing that helped you and the need that you need. So they attack and they attract to those needs, knowing that if they fulfill them, eventually they'll be able to will you back in. Well, when those honeymoon stages came, that's what happened when we were, you know, breaking up once the abuse started. Again, when those first 2 years, it was okay. I mean, I had my daughter, but you know, I also had, you know, friends and she had family on her dad's side. So, you know, every other weekend she's gone, you know, I'm kid free. All the things were great. And what I looked at being is great until the abuse started.
Okay. So we had this 2 year honeymoon period. It was you were feeling a void in this relationship from not having an actively involved parent, father in your life. Um, and there was no real, you didn't feel threatened or intimidated or endangered. You just noticed a few things. It was like, that is
Well, I mean,
quite
you
right.
don't even notice them then. You know, I notice them now just because of the education that I had. But back then, it wasn't like we deer hunt. So there are some things that, you know, like, oh, okay. Because we literally hunt for deers. We sleep, we camp, we did all of those things. So guns wasn't never not around. But with that incident, as far as just it's not a hunting season, you don't have a license and it's an animal and you choose to kill, those things just wasn't a red flag back then at all.
Okay. So then tell us about the next transition in the relationship. You said you had your daughter, and that's things started to change and move physically violent or emotionally violent or abusive.
Yeah. Yep. So it started with, I mean, it immediately started with that physical abuse. Once the first blow came, I went to the doctor's office that was a little further out just because all of my family members worked and all of my family members is pretty much all women. So, and they worked in the medical field. So I was afraid of them finding out. When I went to that doctor's appointment and she asked me, was I in danger at home? I said no. And why I said no is because like his cousin was sitting right next to me. He didn't go himself, he sent his cousin. And then she said, "Are you in a domestic violence situation?" And again, I'm sitting right in front, of a male, and that's his cousin. So even if I wanted to say yeah at that time, it wasn't meant for me to say it. I was more scared of saying yeah, not knowing what the heck is going to go on. This is my first time, experiencing domestic violence. So like all the things are running through my head. So we left there. I mean, and that was the first time I was silent, literally, when I was in that doctor's office. Once we left there, I started getting double vision, and I started getting headaches, and that's when I went back to the doctor. They sent me to an eye specialist and let me know that my eye socket was fractured and that I would need surgery in order to get that fixed. Um, I, wondered how am I going to tell my family, like I got to have surgery, I got to put under. And so I had gotten a car accident while I was pregnant. And so I told them it was from that car accident and getting T-boned by someone. That's how that's how my eye needed surgery. They went with it and I was able to have that surgery. After surgery, I healed, and then that's when more blows came to that exact same eye. So I had already had surgery, all the things. My plates that are in my eye are the thickness of a milk carton, so a plastic milk jug. That's about how thick the plates are in my eye. And as he continued to hit me, that's when I was like, okay, I got to get knives because I know I have this eye surgery. I don't want to be blind. Like, what can I do? So I started to sleep with knives. And then it just went to emotional abuse. I've been strangled before, I've never been openly handed smack, but I feel like it like physical abuse does not matter. Whether it's an open hand smack, whether it's a pin up against the wall, whether it's the pulling of your hair, a black eye, like those things don't matter. Physical is a physical. And then after that emotional abuse started, we moved into another house. And that's when, like, I don't know what phase of his life he was in, but that's when the guns started, to be put into play. And in 2008, in the midst of an argument, gun had already been put to my head and told that I would be killed. I just looked up to the heavens and was like, when I get out of this, I'm gonna be who I need. Like I need somebody. I don't know who I need. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know who I can trust. But I need somebody. By the end of 2008 is when I finally told my cousin. She invited me to, I truly can't remember what the dinner was for, but we went to PF Chang's, we sat, we ate, and then again, she looked across from me and she said, the spirit is telling me that you need to tell me something. And back then I'm like, girl, the spirit is tripping. You need to come, let's eat this food and finish smiling. And she looked at me dead in my eyes and said, no, I'm serious. Like, it's telling me you need to tell me something. I didn't know what she knew. I didn't even know if she knew anything, but she was telling the truth. And it was the first time that I was able to be a voice for myself. Limited, but it was being a voice. I did not give them all the information. Did not give her all the information at the time in reference to the guns, but I did give her information in reference to my black eyes and the surgery. And then some of the marks on my neck, like asked about before. Told her on a Friday, Sunday, well, in between Friday and Sunday, she had talked to my family members. They had a whole meeting at my auntie's house. They told me to come over And we literally just cried on the floor. In some of that meeting, you know, it was aunties that said that they had been through domestic violence. So it was kind of like okay, I do have a little bit of, you know, support here.
You're not by
So,
yourself no more. You see that this is happening to
so
other people. Okay.
yeah. So at that time, that Monday, I was a full-time college student at that time, and they were like, okay, Monday you go to school. You're going to get picked up, leave your car there, and then we're going to meet you at the house because my child's father he's in the streets. He was in the streets. So once he left for the day, he was gone until later that day. And then so he left. We went back to my house. My aunties had got a U-Haul. Their husbands was over. When I tell you, we moved the house in about 45 minutes at the most. The full 3-bedroom, huge barn shed in the backyard was completely cleared. And, you know, what was his was left. In the process of them moving, my cousin took me over to my landlord's house. Who was she was a woman at that time. I can remember standing on a porch and I said, I gotta move. And that's crazy. I haven't talked about this. And she was like, no, you can't do that. And then I looked her in the face and I was like, I'm fleeing domestic violence. And she was like, okay, go. No penalty. Don't worry about anything. Go. Whew, I haven't even talked about that. But yeah. So I left, moved with my mother, graduated college, and then in the midst of that, I still didn't have a plan. My family was there to support. You know, the first couple weeks they check up on you, see how you're doing. But you know, once that month roll around and come in, um, things are needed. You know, gas is needed. You know, how are we now? Because you know, people are starting to, you know, kind of drift back into their life. How am I going to, you know, pick up the kids when I, you know, got a late work or I have a job? All the things started rolling in, and he knew what I needed. You know, I was only able to stay away a couple months, but before those couple months was even over, he had already been able to, you know, text and say, I know you need this. Like, here, meet me here. You know, you can leave the kids at the house. You know, I ain't trying to talk to you. I ain't trying to do nothing. And then that ultimately leads to why you keep doing this. Like, sit here and talk to me. You know, I ain't gonna do nothing to you. You know, that honeymoon stage starts to kick in. And they start to tell you, they start to do everything that they were in the great stages, everything that they were when you met. And it worked. So when I moved out from my mother, I was moving into an apartment. I had a job, had graduated, and he was moving right back in. He was moving right back in to the apartment. And then
At
once
that point, did you believe that he was a changed person? Had anything occurred that made you believe that he was changed and that he wasn't going to do it anymore and could have a happy family?
yep, because right before I left my house with my family moving me out, that's when I had joined church. In 2008, I had joined Living Water. I had been going to Living Water hard, you know, really trying to figure out, you know, what my life is. I just didn't know. And you know, through those, he started to come to church. And then, you know, he started to come to church more. And then eventually, you know, we started to talk more. And then that could lead to you know, going to eat after dinner, you know, going to eat after church. And then like eventually, like he gave himself back to the Lord. He's talking to ministers, you know, he's doing all the things that we want, you know, are that person that we love. Because at that point I was still in love with him, no doubt. Um, and when a victim is still in love with their abuser, it's hard. You know, you gotta give them real facts at their level. So even when the individual was put in my face, because I had went to an individual and explained my story, and you know, they were like, well, what you want to do? And you typically go to an individual for guidance. And when they tell you what you want to do, then that's like set up for failure. Because like I need you to tell me what I should do. I need you to tell me what are the cycles, and they weren't equipped at that time to tell me that. And again, he was doing everything that he was supposed to do. So at that time, I'm
What
like,
did you
okay,
need to hear at that time?
I needed to know what the cycle was of abuse. I needed to know that there is a attention stage and then abuse stage and then I need to know about that honeymoon stage.
Let's take
Like,
a moment for you to share for our viewers the cycle of abuse. Everybody doesn't know. Let's enlighten, increase awareness. Let's spend a little time on the cycle of abuse.
definitely. I think the cycle of abuse is the most important thing in any conversation that you have with a victim, especially a victim that you know still loves their abuser, with no judgment, you know, and with nothing ill besides trying to get them out of your heart. You have to be able to explain that cycle, and it starts with that tension. You know, if you can, we all can walk in the room and we can feel tension of whether something is wrong, two people are angry at each other, or you know somebody in your household is angry. Like you can walk in a room and know that energy and that tension is off. You know, it could be related to drugs, drinking, you know, whatever brought that it could be related to so many things that could factor that. But once that tension has started in an abusive relationship, it automatically leads to abuse. And that abuse, you know, whether it's the physical, the emotional, the psychological, whatever that abuse is, it happens. And then right after that abuse is that honeymoon stage that comes back around. And that individual abuser is everything that you know they can be. Everything that you hope that they would be through the abuse that you went through. Like, I hope that they change. I know what they're capable of doing. I've seen it. They're a great individual. The flowers, the I'm sorry's, the presents, like everything happens in that stage long enough to secure that victim back to trusting them and bringing that wall down some, just so that way once that wall come down, they're no longer protected, and boom, the cycle starts all over again. That power, and once they get that power and that control back, that cycle starts back over again anytime they feel they've lost power and control. It's not anger. Most people, you know, associate it with anger, but when you associate it with anger, it's putting the blame back on the victim. Well, if you wouldn't have made me angry, I wouldn't have did this. Well, or even if you wouldn't have did this, I wouldn't have gotten angry. No, like it's your fault that you did this abuse. It has nothing to do with you may have gotten angry, but it's not my fault for getting angry. You have to be able to that self accountability and control yourself. And that's like was important. Like,
That's a good point because even practitioners, you know, I've been a social worker since the early 90s and have been in a lot of different clinical settings. And one of the things early on that was typically prescribed was for the abuser to take anger management.
yeah,
You know, learn to control your emotions and your anger when the issue they may be needed, but the main
right.
issue is the power
Yeah.
and control thing.
Yeah. So and so the anger that they do, they may have anger problems. They and some of them do, but the most important thing with an abuser is they need to understand that abuse. They need to understand the batterer's mindset. They need to understand that this is attached deeper than the individual that you're abusing. Like this could be going back from generations. Like they need to be able to identify with those things in order for us to balance the scale at all. We have to figure out a way, even with the abusers, like we're saving the victims, but how do we get into a hold of the abusers, even at a level of community, outside of the system? Because majority are caught in the system before they're mandated to take the batter's intervention or anger management or anything. But how can we as a society make it to where, you know, these individuals can reach out themselves? These individuals can, are even in a relationship. Some people want to stay together. You know, and that's something that's offered where if you take this batter's intervention, you know, program, then maybe we can discuss it. Because that's just how life is. Everybody will not, until they're completely fed up, leave that abusive relationship. They have to be fed up for it.
Okay. Good deal. So we went through the honeymoon um, period. You back in the relationship, and things are starting to go south again. So let's fast forward a bit to when you left for the final time.
Yep. So, you know, outside of that high speed chase and the gun puts on my head, I started to get into school. So I graduated with my associates for business management, and then I went back for my bachelor's. And going back with my bachelor's for my bachelor's starting in 2012 is when I started learning what domestic violence was. So from 2006 for 6 years, I just didn't know what it was. Man ain't supposed to hit a woman ain't supposed to hit a man, but I didn't know the cycle. And I was sitting down at my desk and I was doing an assignment on abuse. And literally everything that was in that book was me and my kids. I mean, if I could have put a set of where it said victim, my name, instead of saying children, put my kids' names, like it would have flowed 100% with what I was going through. And that's when the light bulb went off. That's when I started digging in trainings. I did that for 2 years. Worked with individuals who were trying to flee domestic violence while I was going home to the domestic violence. And then by 2014, 2 years later, we still had a gun issue as far as him still having guns. And we were texting. Well, actually, he was texting me. I was at work. I didn't reply to his text long enough or quick enough. And then the last text that I looked down and I read, it said, "I'm coming to kill you." And it was at that moment where I was like, oh, it's gonna be another one of those days. Like, I don't even want to go home. Like, I'm thinking
I
of
think
like,
it
get the
becomes
kids and
so
just go to
normal.
my house.
It was
It had,
normal.
be,
Like,
it had become
okay, you
so
didn't
normal.
answer my text, so I'm coming to kill you. That's not normal.
Yep. And then the environment that I was working in was predominantly male. So, there is no power and control because I'm around nothing but males. So that was a trigger for him, not, with that insecurity of not knowing, like, is she strong enough? Is she going to do anything with him? And, once I seen his car pull up and the white car pull up and he got out and popped that trunk, that's, everything in me just stopped. It just sat still. And then I just went into, flight. So I ran to that front door. I locked the door. He seen me lock the door and he knew that there was a side door that I would not be able to get to before he got to it. So I instantly grabbed the cell phone and I called 911. I couldn't think, there was no way I could think of, he's not going to do it. He's just mad. At this point, at some time in relationships, it's in the home. It's a point of abuse to where nobody on the outside can see it. But then once it turns into abuse that people can see, the black eyes, the bruises, like once it rolls out into the community with your abuse, that's the most dangerous. And when an individual can threaten to come to your job and kill you, threaten to come to your job and beat you, like that is letting you know that that individual no longer cares who sees and no longer cares what happens. And that's the most dangerous time in a domestic violence relationship. And I called 911. They came. They were like, okay, you need to go do a protection order. I was afraid of that, doing a protection order. I didn't even know what that consists of or how it looked like. I just didn't know. And I left. I went and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a protection order. And then I was able to get in at the Julian Center right away as far as for an advocate to sit down at the table with me and complete that protection order. And then in the midst of that, they submitted me over for the Indiana Criminal Justice Institution is what I want to say. And they gave me a free lawyer, a free pro bono lawyer to represent me in court. So a lot of the weight that our city victims are feeling now, I didn't have to feel that. Like I had representation that could say, this is what's going to happen. Let me prepare you, for what you're going to have to say while you're there. Your abuser is going to be there. Like they told me those things before other people in the community. They don't know that until they get there. And I think the most scariest thing about it all was I got it. They ex parte'd it within 24 hours. So I got the text message saying it was granted. That was a new milestone for me because I had left several times before. So that alone was like oh my God, you've done something you've never done. But then it was super scary. Like, oh my God, like you've done something you've never done. What is he gonna do? And then once it was time to go to court, like I was extremely frightened. Like I hadn't seen him since, for a month there, because the court dates are like a month out. I hadn't seen him. I hadn't talked to him. I just didn't know what to expect if he has
What
friends,
was that
sitting.
month like? What was the month like when you're kind of like living in hiding? There's a protective order, but we know they don't always honor that. What was that like for you and your children?
You know what? It was miserable. It was scary. Um, it was all the feelings that I could muster. Outside of me masking them all when I go to work. I was the happiest, most cheerful, still morning person. You would not know that I'm going through anything when I walked out that door. But when I walked out that door, you know, I looked before I even stepped completely out the door. I was looking at both sides, you know, looking around the house to make sure that he wasn't there just because he was one of those that jumped out of the bushes. He was one of those that's jumped out of my closet. He's jumped out the laundry room, like he's just appeared out of places. So any white car was terrifying. It automatically put me, you know, in a trigger mode to where, you know, my heart drops and I'm wondering if that's him. And so I visually could see, oh, that's a different car. Um, and then my children, you know, at that point, the protection order was with my children on it as well. So school was secure, as far as him not being able to come up there because I knew he was served. Um, but in the midst of that, I was also, you know, I was losing the house. He was paying for half of the rent. I was not in a place where I could, you know, provide for majority of the rent. So I knew that I would be losing the house. Like everything just started going downhill. Before I moved out and moved with my mom back into the exact same storage unit. Um, I moved in with my mom because I just wouldn't be able to afford the place. In addition to like the house was being sold, all the things, I ended up losing my car. So I literally went all the way down to ground zero when I moved back with my mother. And that was a place where I was like, okay, I gotta fast. Um, like I have to fast. I see things going downhill. Like I gotta tap into the spiritual realm one day, one way or another. I fast so many times before and failed. 100% failed. It's hard. It was a mental thing, but I had to surrender. There was nothing else that I can give in this situation. Like I am depleted. I have nothing in me, and I
The
did it for
ground
40 days.
zero for you was the place of surrender, and you were able to complete a fast. I would say one that is beyond the average person's ability to do. So, God
But
was protecting you.
yes, he was spiritual. I mean, because I didn't, I mean, when I got to that 41st day, he had put so much and poured so much in me that I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna pick it up, you know, the 42nd day and the 44th, third day and the 45th. So I ended up completely giving up meat. You know, I didn't even go back to meat at all. Like I sacrificed it and just was like, okay, we ain't even picking it back up. I learned some more stuff about meat, and still to this day, like I don't eat meat from that fast that I started after my abuse. It wasn't even a month after my abuse. It was 29 days after my abuse is when I started after I fled my abuse that I had started, you know, my fast and getting that spiritual cleansing that ultimately led me to a gym that I had never been in a gym since I was in high school that allowed me to get that healthy mental cleansing. Like the gym was my mental break. The gym was where,
Most people miss that piece how we are so intertwined, you know, spiritual, mental, physical. We think of it as just a cliche or something, but it is really real. And as you heal in one area, it brings about healing in other areas. And can certainly that fast would bring you to a place where you could see yourself as God sees you. And
yes,
regardless of what is proclaimed in this world, you see yourself as God's daughter and not an object to be abused and subjected to such
yes,
abuse. And so being able to be set free from that, that's an amazing thing. And I know that we're going to talk in a little bit about what the church community can do to support survivors and even the efforts of someone such as yourself who has created these organizations and serving these roles. How can we help? I will definitely swing back around to that piece because it really brought balance to you and it sounded like some staying power. Some things stayed with you.
yes.
Some self-love things stayed with you. That's really good to hear. Um, so was Silent No More birthed through you during your time of fasting?
So yeah, so Silent No More was birthed honestly before I even got out of domestic violence.
Okay.
Just because I had already started learning it those 2 years before I got out, I had already started like mastering domestic violence. Like I'm going to trainings, I'm going to free seminars, I'm doing listening to like I'm doing everything that I can to learn domestic violence. So emotionally, I was already detached. So when I got out of it, I did my fast, and then by July, we were collecting items to give to the COVID shelter in October. It was huge for the first time. No one knew that I had a story at that time. I was still silent with my voice, but I knew that silent no more was it. Like I'm not being silent no more. I'm helping. I never attached the two. Like I never put my story with it. And then it wasn't until Silent No More started in 2014, and then 2015 is when I got registered. I went to a conference with Lady Nicole Green, and her conference was called Game Changer. And then that's when she literally broke down me and the power and what's before me. It was a way of, okay, you ain't listening through what I'm trying to struggle through, God was saying. So here, let me put this person in front of you. And when I got done with that, all I heard was, it's time to be a voice. And I was like, no, I don't want to tell people my story. I was still in that fear of being judged, looked at as weak. So even though I was helping in one realm, I didn't want the views of others upon me, just because I knew I was still in a weak, vulnerable moment. But I made my first post that put it in a story form more so than like it literally was like reading a book. I needed the readers to feel it more so than me telling my story. I needed and that one post, I mean, it brought so many people on the outside that admitted to being abused, admitted to being abusers, admitted to seeing it through childhood. And then that really just pushed something in me that was like, keep going, like they need you. Um, and then I talked to my kids during the first 2 years of me fleeing abuse. I needed to focus on me. Like God told me, like, I need you to focus on you and your household, your kids. And with my degree, with me going through my degree, I hadn't graduated yet. They kicked me out from the abuse and what I was going through. But I focused on my kids, and they didn't know what domestic violence was. They felt the emotion of what we were going through. They never seen my black eyes, but however they did that emotional and psychological piece of that a mother should be given to their children. I lacked it just because I was in that domestic violence situation. So I started focusing on them, asking them about abuse, teaching them about abuse, asking them, do they know what teenage abuse is? Like really digging in. All the way from like their childhood, because they were still young, but I wanted to tap into everything. And once they were like, I don't know what it is, I started teaching them. And then the friends that was coming around, I was asking them. I was like, what you know about teen date abuse? And they were like, what? What is that? So then I started asking them questions. And before you know it, I was starting to lean more and look more into teens, like, because I know the teens are our future. Like when I see a teen, I see a future. When I see a baby, I see a future. So I'm like, okay, that's my niche. Kids ain't never going nowhere. I'm going that way. And that's when we started branching into schools.
What
I work at a
exactly are the services that Silent No More currently provides?
Yep. So currently it's the education, prevention, awareness, and intervention.
Mhm.
So Silent No More can do workshops for teens as well as adults. But that intervention is the biggest piece that we do, which is the emergency shelter placement. So we provide that emergency shelter placement 24 hours a day, um, 24 hours a day on the weekends, 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. on the weekdays, because the other shelters are full, but they pretty much answer every day, all day. And then that wraparound services with that nutrition, transportation, one-on-one management, so that way that plan can be put into place, as well as referral resources, so that way they can get the additional things that they need to continue to stay free from domestic violence and not go back.
Meeting those tangible needs that help somebody. Yeah, they need spiritual help and tangible
Yeah.
assistance. Good deal. So then you moved well, I guess simultaneously, because Silent No More is still in existence, and you're also the director of domestic violence prevention for the city of Indianapolis. Tell us um, what exactly you do in that role, because I think that is the public now sees you very frequently in that role, usually on the scene of an incident and things of that nature. But I don't know that all of our viewers really understand what you do in that role and what the goal of it is.
Yep. Outside of the abuse, which is the emotional and let's say not good thinking, it was one of the hard decisions. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life because I knew taking on the city program that I would step down as the executive director of Silent No More, even though I'm the founder and president of it. But now I'm president since I've stepped down. That was one of the hardest decisions because I didn't know how I was going to be able to build Silent No More, how Silent No More was going to go get in the city position. Once I got the city, well, of course, God spoke to me, told me to, present this person to the board. We presented them. The board loved it. Seeing how much they continue to support, and then of course, Silent No More was safe. So then the city program. When I got the city program, that there was absolutely nothing, like no blueprint, no nothing to follow. I literally had to sit down and figure what was going to be best for the city. That means meeting with the domestic violence agencies, listening to the community, and then taking the experience that I had for the last 8 years directly in the community and seeing what the city needs. Now the city has their system, or I've built the program to be a streamline for victims and survivors. They would be able to call us instead of just getting a resource brochure saying, okay, here's the resources, take these numbers down, call this number and see which one works best for you. We literally can streamline that individual to where they need to go. So if they call them, they need an emergency shelter placement, we're able to see the bed count of those in the shelter. So we can know before we even send you there to do an intake, they don't have any space available. So then we look at the other agencies, including Silent No More, to say, okay, is there emergency shelter placement available outside of shelters? And then we're able to put them where they need to go with that emergency shelter placement funding. And then the second component, because there's 4 pillars to it. So that's that victim survivor. And then we have the agencies. So one of the things that I noticed is that our domestic violence agencies was not meeting in Indianapolis. So we didn't know what each other was doing. We didn't know, what funding was available for us to refer victims over to. We wanted to hear each other's voice, like bringing our ideas together, bringing our concerns together, and being a solution for that domestic violence. So I started the monthly group for us to meet together, wanting their voices to be heard, knowing that we're all at this table, on the same level. Let's do this. Then that rolled over to the system. I believe as a city, we should know what our system provides. So understanding what the IMPD do once they're on the scene, what can they do and can't they do, so we can continue to push that out to the community so they can know. So when IMPD comes to the scene, instead of them automatically assuming that they would be able to remove a person that has been there for, a month, has clothes there, like understand that they can't do that. Like that's just not what they're able to do. They go by the law. So explaining those things, then the detectives, explaining. So we're equipped to know what the system does. And then we want to make sure that we're giving that to the agencies, giving that to the community, and then giving it back to the agencies. To let them know, hey, this is what the community is saying. This is what we need as agencies. How can we make this work? And then the third or the fourth component is the community, like being boots on the ground, going to areas where you don't see too many agencies going door to door, stopping, talking to the community, like listening to them, and then being out, at outreach events, tabling as much as we can. So those are the 4 pillars, to the city program. And then as we continue to grow, our goal is to amplify those that are doing the work. So all the domestic violence agencies, we can amplify them. We can say, oh no, this is what they do. This is their program. So if you have people that need this, like this would be the program that they need to go to. Don't send them here, because then they're going to feel like they failed when they did a 25-minute intake only for it to not be what they need. So, trying to prevent that re-traumatizing of victims when they are trying to get that
That's
service.
very wise, very wise. So you've been in this role how long now?
Almost a decade. I'm almost at, oh, wait,
For the
that's
city.
not this role. Okay. Look, I'm thinking of overall, right? So this started in January. The first, months were of building the program, trying to really solidify a foundation for the program. And we've been pretty much active since about April as
Okay.
far as
Of
doing
this
the
year,
barrier busters and stuff
2022.
like
Good. And then almost a decade in the domestic violence prevention work as a whole. Well,
that. Thank
congratulations,
you.
because I believe it is making an impact. And while we do see quite a bit on the news, um, we're seeing a lot because awareness is increasing. But that doesn't mean that it's not working. That just means that what's going on is more visible. So we thank you so much for that. So then we want to
Thank you.
spend some time talking about what can the church do to support the work that you do and others in this field. There in the past, and maybe even in some places in the present, the church has been found guilty. The church as a community has been found guilty of supporting or protecting offenders and predators more so than the victim. And sometimes it's out of lack of knowledge, sometimes it's out of misinterpretation of scripture, for a lot of different reasons. And many, including at First Baptist Church North Indianapolis, our pastor, our senior pastor, is Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks, and he is an advocate for women and children and widows and anybody who is underserved, the vanguard for the community. And so he makes it his business that we are in position and that we are serving. We're serving all that we need to serve, and we're elevating awareness in that we step up to the plate and the challenge to say, hey, what have we been doing that wasn't working? What do we need to be doing now that will work? What we are aware that there are victims who they ran to church and the church gave them some improper advice. We also have people who have come to the church and been loved on and helped and supported, and that was the turning point for them. We also aware that it's dangerous to be in these situations, and a lot of times people who are not involved end up hurt, and so we want to be educated on how to properly pursue this. We don't attest to be an expert in all of this, and so that's why we bring in somebody who is an expert, who's been working on this exclusively for 10 years. So from your perspective, what can the church community do to support victims, to hold offenders accountable in the way that they can be healed and brought back into the fold, but not more than the support that we provide for victims? And how can we support organizations such as yours?
Okay, so the first thing that I would say is that admitting, and accepting that any organization, whether it's a church, whether it's a business, that if people are being served, if people are coming in there, that we can guarantee that someone has been abused or being abused. It's a 1 in 3 statistic. So being able to accept that even though they're coming to church, there can be victims, within the house. There can be survivors that are mentally still stuck. So accepting that, as a church organization, as a church entity first, and then having these conversations. Like these conversations is big to have in the congregation. And not the conversations to where you go up and you have 3 minutes, you have 5 minutes before the pastor comes on for that Sunday. That it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so you have some churches, and we solely appreciate it, that have us come in and but we're up there for 3 minutes. How can we have real conversations, like these conversations, to where it can be more so in depth. It can be a session. The church is they definitely support their pastors and support the church. So having these conversations, I think, is huge, as well as the resources. we thought was super big and would be super important is, getting that leadership into, a 45-minute training, into an hour training of saying, okay, let us equip you with domestic violence 101, because you may not have seen it. You may not have had to experience it at all, but let us equip you so when someone comes, you all have the proper protocol that you would like your leadership to do. Whether that's, taking that information directly to the admin as well as the minister. So the minister can do their part. We're praying with them. And then the admin can do their part. We're getting them directly linked to domestic violence resource. Like having that system the same way when we have systems for intruders that come into the building, the same way we have a tornado drill. Like we need to make sure that we have a system for when those individuals do come, that they know that they have the ultimate support and resources, for their victims that are in the church. And then like you can always support, of course, in October. But I think those main key things is equipping the leadership, having the resources within the church, and then getting that training, whether that's once a year, just making sure that we keep that training. Not only will leaderships be able to get the understanding of what DV 101 is, but they'll be able to see, like, we can get them a list of, the top 10 zip codes. And then they can compile it. Like if they really want to, they can compile that list with, their congregants, who's in their congregation, and to know, that even my church, where it sits at in the community, is in a community where domestic violence is at an increase. The church is in 46218. Like the houses in that community, the families in that community are suffering the most in our city. Like they're living behind those closed doors. So how can we get in those churches? In all the other zip codes, because people can travel from one zip code to another just to be in church. So I think that those are the three big components to helping. It's the training, having the resources, and then having those conversations.
Equipping our leadership, having the resources. What are the resources that are you, when you say resources, do you mean like information about organizations who serve victims of domestic violence, or what resources are you speaking of?
I'm gonna be honest, the resources I'm talking about is us, the city program, because I can give you all the resources, right? I can give you 8 resources and tell you to have these in your office, but then the admin is going to give them 8 resources, which is putting the weight back on the victim. Like call one of these numbers and they'll help, compared to calling one number and they're going to streamline you, whether that's to a shelter or to Silent No More, or to therapy. Like they'll be able to streamline you and prevent that re-traumatizing or, telling that story again. So ultimately coming to us will give that victim a plethora of all the resources. However, if an agency still wants those resources, like, we would definitely, having those resources, if you want them, that can still happen. 100%. So if they want multiple resources, get it. But if they can say, oh baby, I am so sorry for what you're going through, thank you for allowing me to pray for you, we have an organization that can streamline you to whatever services you need. That's given one number. They can still come back to you, and if they need more prayer, but they also have that one number on their shoulders instead of a full list.
That's key what you just said there, because it makes me think of a lot of times people who want to help, who may not be totally educated in the arena of what the needs really are, may believe that I prayed for you, I gave you that number, I'm done. No, this is a process. This is a process. This is not a one-time fix. It's a process. People escaping domestic violence and other forms of abuse and oppression. It's a process. Typically it's not a instantaneous thing. So good information. And my pastor again, Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks, just is right up his arena. We have a resource fair. We do a lot of things in the community, and he wants people who come to us to receive real help and not have to jump through 100 hoops and be discouraged. So this is right up our alley. So we'll definitely be in contact. I want you to share a little bit about the numbers in Indianapolis. So let's say like in a week, how many cases are you seeing in a month, maybe how many cases you're seeing, and then we'll spend a little time on you sharing how people can access the resource.
So our months vary, and of course, by me being the director of it, I touch a lot of people, but we have advocates. We have we have four advocates altogether, including myself. We have three that actually do the work. One is bilingual in Spanish as well, just so that way we can hit that Black and brown population as needed. So we hit maybe about 100 different clients a month. And then of course those barrier busters depend on, you know, what those clients' needs are. In addition to those protection orders. So we do a lot of protection orders as well. And then we also, you know, will assist with going to court too. Overall, the statistics for, you know, that guns related to domestic violence is increased by 183% with death related to, you know, those
183% increase.
Yeah. Since COVID, it has went, you know, up tremendously, unfortunately. Some of those are, you know, murder, suicides, or single death. But a lot of those have been, you know, multiple deaths from, you know, domestic violence with those firearms. So it's super important that, you know, we try to get that information to the community of saying, if a gun is in your house, like it increases your chance 500% of being murdered. So we need to make sure that you understand that that gun in the home ultimately kill you or kill, you know, you and your children or the whole household. So knowing those facts.
We don't want to slide by that quickly. We want everyone to understand. She just said, if there's a gun in your home and a history of domestic violence in your home, the chances of you dying from gunshot is increased by 500%. Did I state that correctly?
You said it correctly.
That says a whole lot. 500% increase of death, chance of death.
Yeah, that and you know, with the gun laws changed and pretty much everybody can carry except, you know, the felons with gun charges, but most of the times they still carry. It's super important. I try to tell people when you start dating, like there is a protection order registry that you can look up and you can see names. Like you can type in a name and you can see if the person that you're dating has ever had a protection order. That's one of the most important things that I think, you know, the people in general, you know, you should be checking that protection order. It says a lot, you know,
if a person has a protection order registry.
Correct.
Is that available online?
Yes, so it's available online. And I can send you over the link. That way you can, you know, share it as well. And you literally put that person's first and last name in there. If you got the date of birth, it makes it even perfect because they can narrow it down. And it'll show you, you know, whether they had their very first one in 2001 or in 1977. It's going to tell you that very first one, and then it's going to tell you all the way up to the most recent one. It won't give any other information besides when it was served and when it was issued in the system. Like, and then if it expired, it'll tell you it's expired. Like, I think those are important outside of like just checking the individual's background and seeing those domestic violence charges. Even though they were dismissed, they were still there. And if they're there, those are red flags before you can do anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the resource that we want to lift the most today is the city of Indianapolis. So if we have a viewer who wants to share, report, seek resources, seek help for a loved one, and you don't want to go to your church, if your church is in a good place to share that information, I pray that it is. But if you don't, then you can go directly to the city of Indianapolis and contact her office, the domestic violence prevention. So how would they, is it best to call, best to email? What is your procedure?
Yep. So it's you can either give us a call. It's a 24-hour line. You can always get somebody at 317-210-0866. Or you can email, as I know it's, technology is huge, at champions, CHAMPIONS at Indy, INDY, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, F as in Frank.org.
All right, there you have it. This has been a great show. It's a difficult but necessary conversation. We are so proud of you. We want to support you and lift you up so that victims can see, they could come, they could get help, and even offenders. If you're abusing somebody, and if you need help. So we challenge you to get the help that you need, so that this can be a safer community for us all. Because I know of a statistic that is alarming. That is 80% of youth who find themselves detained in the Marion County Juvenile Detention Center, if they have witnessed domestic violence, it's an elevated risk. It's a high percentage that they will end up being attached to domestic violence offenders, or that they'll become offenders themselves. So it's important to get your children the help that they need when they have witnessed such things, and just living under that tension, like you said earlier about the you can walk in the room and feel it, that something isn't right. I've been in those arenas helping families, and you know that something's not right. So again, to all our viewers, we thank you so much for being here with us today. Ms. Danielle Smith, we are so proud of you and the work that you're doing. We are so thankful that God saw fit to move you not from only being a survivor, but a thriver, somebody who has gone back into her own community to really help bring other people out. I call her the Moses of domestic violence, because I see you delivering people, and I'm so proud of you. My sister, the Community Impact Spotlight shines today on Danielle Smith. God bless you. God bless the city of Indianapolis and the work that we all come together to do to help survivors of domestic violence. So you have a great, blessed day. We thank you all. Tune in again the next third Sunday in November for our next show. God bless you all.